Hello everyone, and welcome to my video discussion on the topic of fundamentalist-modernist controversy. My topic that I've chosen is actually a very broad one, and I'm doing this because I want to actually generate discussion. That's kind of my goal. It's a discussion board, so I want to generate some discussion with the topic of schism. Mainly, how do these schisms arise and how are they justified? So, to give a little bit of background and to pick a starting point, with a special nod to Dan Carlin of Hardcore History, who says, the hardest thing about talking about history is picking out a point to start, because you have to talk about things that lead up to things before you can talk about the thing. And with this topic, you can go back thousands of years, so that's very challenging. On the subject of schism as it relates to this class, though, I picked as a starting point that the person of Charles Briggs at Princeton Theological Seminary. Charles Briggs was a student of the German school of higher criticism, a school of thought that approached ancient texts in a very critical manner, kind of examining how, who wrote these texts, when were they written, and were they actually written by the people who we think they were written by, and being very critical of this. Of course, introducing this method brought a lot of controversy, partially because along with this is Briggs wanted to shift the Westminster Confession and Calvinism in general to reflect modernity, partially because he believed that this had already been taking place, that Calvinism and the Presbyterian Church had already shifted to reflect modernity. He just wanted to make it official. Of course, this received a lot of pushback from people like J. Gresham Machen, who founded the Orthodox Presbyterian Church and Westminster Theological Seminary, kind of in response. These are kind of this pendulum that swings back and forth and leads to splits when people can't agree. So as an example, Dr. Schultz mentioned in his lecture that as a way of framing this discussion, three types of Christians, according to Machen, were the modernists, pietists, and consecrationists. And he saw everybody as fitting into one of these three categories. As a result, when you categorize people, you tend to place people in the other, and that tends to cause division. But at the same time, everyone's defining their position slightly differently. So whose definitions do you use? When you have someone like Machen, of course, that is pushed back from another angle, and that came from someone like Henry Emerson Fosdick, who in his sermon entitled "Shall the Fundamentalists Win?" asserted that we should not identify the fundamentalists with the conservatives. All fundamentalists are conservatives, but not all conservatives are fundamentalists. Of course, this raises a lot of question of who is what and in what camp does one find themselves. This, of course, is all a very broad overview of a topic that is fairly important, because all of these events led to the splitting in the Presbyterian Church, and very similar actions led to splits in other churches like the Baptist, different Baptist conventions. But Machen, for example, is stated, "It is not schism to break away from an apostate church. Indeed, it is schism to remain in an apostate church, since to remain in an apostate church is to separate from the true church of Jesus Christ." This brings up a couple of really important questions that I think we should discuss and are worth pondering. Who decides what is apostate and what is not? Especially when all the parties involved claim to be using Scripture, claim to be basing their claims on Scripture and using Scripture as an authority, they're just doing so differently. So when some groups say that they rely on the inerrancy of Scripture, the group that is in opposition is usually not claiming the opposite. They're simply using those terms very differently. So what I encourage you to do is to investigate what warrants schism. Were these schisms warranted within the Presbyterian Church? Were they justified, or should they stay together and work it out? And we've seen this in many churches over the centuries, But most relevant to this particular topic is the Presbyterian split in the early 20th century and how that affects us today. So the question to ponder really is a schism justified, and if so, based on what? So I hope that that spurs some thought, and I love to see your comments in response, and I look forward to engaging with you in the comments. Thank you for taking the time.